All right. Well, let's take our Bibles tonight and let's go to the book of 2 Samuel, chapter number 20, if we could. 2 Samuel, chapter number 20. There was an old woodsman who gave an advice about catching a porcupine. He said, "Watch for the slapping tail as you dash in and drop a large wash tub over him. The wash tub will give you something to do or something to sit on while you ponder your next move." Think about that for a little bit. Now what do I do, right? Well, tonight as we continue our study of 2 Samuel, we'll see that the problems in David's kingdom continue as a result of events that unfolded with Absalom's rebellion. It's much like life. We get victory in one area, only to find problems cropping up in another. Because of the sin in this world, problems are natural consequences that must be dealt with, that we're never going to be void of. And we'll see tonight how David begins to address this problem that he encounters in regards to another effort to save his nation once again from falling into the hands of rebels. Here in 2 Samuel chapter 20, we're not going to finish the chapter tonight or the story, but it mentions here in verse 1 through verse 13. "And there happened to be a man of Belial, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite. And he blew a trumpet and said, 'We have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse, every man to his tent, O Israel.' So every man of Israel went up from after David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah clave unto their king from Jordan even to Jerusalem. And David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to keep the house, and put them in ward, and fed them, but went not in unto them. So they were shut up unto the day of their death, living in widowhood. Then said the king to Amasa, 'Assemble me the men of Judah within 3 days, and be thou here present.' So Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but he tarried longer than the set time which he had appointed him. And David said to Abishai, 'Now shall Sheba the son of Bichri do us more harm than did Absalom. Take thou thy Lord's servants and pursue after them, lest he get him fenced cities and escape.' And there went out after him Joab's men, and the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and all the mighty men, and they went out of Jerusalem to pursue after Sheba the son of Bichri. When they were in the great stone which is in Gibeon, Amasa went before them, and Joab's garment that he had put on was girded unto him, and upon it a girdle with a sword fastened upon his loins in the sheath thereof. And as he went forth, it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, 'Art thou in health, my brother?' And Joab took Amasa by the beard, and with the right hand to kiss him. But Amasa took no heed to the sword that was in Joab's hand. So he smote him therewith in the 5th rib, and shed out his bowels to the ground, and struck him not again, and he died. So Joab and Abishai his brother pursued after Sheba the son of Bichri. And one of the Joab's men stood by him and said, 'He that favoreth Joab, and he that is for David, let him go after Joab.' And Amasa wallowed in blood in the midst of the highway. And when the men saw that all the people stood still, he removed Amasa out of the highway into the field, and cast a cloth upon him, when he saw that every one that came by him stood still. When he was removed from out of the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue after Sheba the son of Bichri." Tonight we're going to look a little bit closer at our passage, of course, as we talk about the problems continue. The problems continue. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this time of being in thy word today. We thank you for the privilege it is to be able to seek thy face and bring glory to thy name. I pray that you bless our time in thy word so that you might be honored and that we could learn some truths from it along the way. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. You know, one of the greatest curses of sin is the problems that come from it. Let's just put it that way. You know, one of the greatest problems with sin is just that it multiplies problems. Every problem that we deal with most likely has a sin root to it in some regards. You know, the Bible mentions in Romans 8, verse 22, "For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now." And why? Well, it's because of all the problems that we deal with on a daily basis. Whether it's our personal problems, whether it's our family problems, job problems, world problems. They're there, aren't they? I bet you if we sat down and each of us began to list out problems, we would come up with a pretty lengthy list, wouldn't we? And it would fulfill what this verse is telling us, that we groan, the whole creation groans in pain together until now because of sin. As we look at this world, we see the fallout from sin all over the place. The scars, the hurts, the tears, the destruction that is the result of mankind's sin. It is all over the place. And you say, oh, it's real bad in this country. Let me tell you something, it's far worse in others. It is really bad in some places. I mean, you'd be surprised how bad it is in some parts of the world. It would make what you and I, if we were to visit some of those places, we'd come back feeling kind of ashamed by what we complain about because of what some of these people go through. But it's all a result, one way or another, from the sin of mankind. It's very heartbreaking. And certainly we've all felt the effects of it to some degree. I like this phrase from the book of Job. In Job chapter 14, verse 1, where it says here, "Man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble." Isn't that the truth? Man, it's a few days. You know, we don't live that long in respect to eternity. The Bible mentions that our life is but a vapor. But it's full of trouble. It's full of trouble. I'll guarantee you, probably every week you deal with some kind of problem, some kind of circumstance, probably every day, really, if we sit and think about it. Unless you just have that good of a day. Sometimes those happen. But, you know, most of the time, we're dealing with some sort of problem. You know, Jacob, as he was being brought in, or as he has been brought into Egypt later in his life, he meets with Pharaoh. And Jacob said unto Pharaoh in Genesis 47:9, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been. I have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage." Now there's a lot he's saying here, but he's being honest. And I've had a difficult life. And a lot of his problems were because of his decisions too. And some people make problems for themselves. But thankfully, one day, all our problems will be gone once God eradicates sin from the creation itself. And that is going to be a very, very nice day. We're going to really appreciate that, I think, more than we will ever know right now. But it says in Revelation 21, verses 4 and 5, "God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. For the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful." You know, God has promised a great hope for born-again Christians, that you will one day no longer sorrow. You'll one day never shed a tear. One day there will never be an experience of death again. There will be none of that. None of that pain emotionally or physically that we feel will exist anymore. And that's going to be pretty nice. And to have everlasting joy in your heart. I mean, it's going to be something that it's going to be surreal, I believe, to think of life that way. And it's going to be something that's going to be a real joy. But until then, we'll find ourselves navigating problems we make because of our choices, and problems others make for us because of their choices. Now we might say that with that second one, boy, that's not fair. People making problems for me, that's just not right. Well, in all reality, we are all guilty of making problems for others ourselves. So, I mean, it's kind of what comes around goes around, right? We're all part of the problem. Nobody gets off at all. Nobody can really say it's unfair. Sometimes we don't even know that we've caused people problems. So we can't scream that. We're all guilty of causing problems for ourselves and others as much as others are guilty of causing problems for themselves and us. It's just a reality. But God knew the problems of this world were inevitable because of sin. He knew that. So in His Word, we find wisdom to navigate and solve our issues so that God can bring good out of them. You know, what's great with God is that He works all things together for good, even the problems that come up in this world. And God has this ability, and I don't exactly understand how it works. Nobody really does. But some way, somehow, within the scope of His sovereignty, problems can occur, but yet God can bring good out of them. It'll be one day real fascinating to see, God, how did you exactly do all that? Right now it's kind of hard to understand, but the Bible tells us that in Romans 8:28, a very familiar, famous verse, is that God can do that. And He has given us His Word to help us know what to do when the problems hit and navigate them. Call it a troubleshooting manual, right? We've all seen manuals at some point. Whether you read them or not, you've seen them. And there's always a troubleshooting part in the manual. Well, the Bible is full of troubleshooting parts because the world has lots of troubles that needs to be shot, if I can put it that way. It needs to be dealt with. And God has those things for us within His Word. It's when we don't apply what God says to our problems, what ends up happening is that they get more complicated and they multiply. It's usually what ends up happening. When we don't do what God tells us to do, live by faith like I talked about this morning, our problems get more complicated, they get messier, and they multiply. And that's not our goal, I imagine. Nobody says, I want more problems in life. Nobody says that. But we automatically do that to ourselves when we're not applying the very things that God is telling us to do to help navigate or fix whatever the issue is. Again, if it's not stopped either, it begins a cycle of sin that is hard to break until somebody steps up and decides to start applying the remedy God has put forth. And in the lives of some people, and even in the lives of family, you see a cycle of sin where somebody isn't stepping up to break that cycle. It's kind of referred to as a family curse, if you will. And guess what? If that multiplies to enough families, that affects a nation. And there's many nations around this world today that the reason they're in such bondage and such rough conditions is because of choices that are constantly being made by each generation and have been going on for, in some cases, hundreds of years. And it's not until some start making those decisions right that they can ever get out of it. That's why it takes a few generations for certain things to fall out of a people group. And it just takes a few generations, or even just one, to go back. It's really interesting when you look at people groups and you look at countries and you look at why things are the way they are there, and that's really what you get. Just God's principles just not being applied to the problems that are cropping up because of the sins. And usually what you have to do when you're dealing with problems is locating where the sin is so it can be stopped. Now, it'll never be perfect because we are sinful people. Problems are always going to exist. And we cannot expect our lives to be void of them, or even few and far in between. That's especially true if you're leading people. Oftentimes, if you're in a position of leadership, whatever it is, you're called to be a problem solver of some sort. That's kind of part of the gig, if you will. Now, in our text, David is in the process of returning to Jerusalem as we've been studying. Of course, he nearly lost the kingdom under Absalom because of Absalom. We've looked at that. However, he goes from that problem now to another new insurrection that is being attempted to be mounted against him. And today we'll examine our text to learn more spiritual lessons from this story as we see first off what I call the instigator. The instigator. Now, if we remember from last time, there was a bit of a dispute over who got the honor of bringing the king back to Jerusalem from his exile. Right? If you look at chapter 19, verse 41, the people of Judah began to bring David back. They brought him over the river, and they were met by the men of Israel. Verse 41, and behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said unto the king, Why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen thee away, and have brought the king and his household and all David's men with him over Jordan? And all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is near of kin to us, wherefore then be ye angry for this matter? Have we eaten at all of the king's cost, or hath he given us any gift? And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, We have 10 parts in the king, and we have also more right in David than ye. Why then did ye despise us, that our advice should not be first had in bringing back our king? In other words, it was their idea first. So why didn't you get us involved? Why did you just go ahead and single-handedly do this? Well, it goes on and says, And the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. So they got kind of into what we might call a shouting match, it appears. They got pretty rough with the words. And with this exchange, yeah, the men of Judah, quote-unquote, prevailed, but it wasn't without consequence, as we see in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 20. And there happened to be there a man of Belial, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite, and he blew a trumpet and said, We have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. So every man of Israel went up from after David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah clave unto their king from Jordan even to Jerusalem. Here the Bible says there happened to be a man of Belial. There happened to be a man of Belial who speaks up at this moment in time when there's some tension going on between the men of Judah and the rest of the tribes, and seems to take advantage of the discord caused by, again, this fierce exchange of words. And I like how the Bible puts it. It just happened to be. Just happened to be there. You know, what do you know? There happened to be there this men of Belial. And when it speaks of a man of Belial, what it's really speaking or referring to is a man of the devil. He was a lost man who was influenced by, I guess we would say, satanic impulses. There was some bad ideas going through his head. And the Bible tells us that Satan likes to take advantage of situations like we see here. And he always has a person ready to do their part. There's always a person, whether it's a man or a woman. There's always a person that the devil has got there hanging around the shadows looking for the opportunity to step in and cause some problems. Because Satan loves to divide God's people. He can be a divider with the intent of conquering both sides. In fact, Jesus mentioned in Matthew 12:25, And Jesus knew their thoughts and said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. And every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. Very concerning words considering the day and age in which we live right now, isn't it? But you see here, who's behind all this? It is the devil, generally. Now, though these things can be negative, God can still use these things to bring some good, too. Again, God can always take a negative situation and bring good. You know, God desires unity. But God can also use these things to separate what we might say the sheep from the goats, those that are true and those who are false, and expose things that were originally hidden from view. So, I mean, there are some things that can come out that are good. Even though nobody wants disunity, everyone wants unity, but the truth of the matter is sometimes that very stuff begins to expose things that were under the surface, that were hidden from view, but are helpful to know as one moves forward. It can really do that. It can really begin to expose some things and show who's genuine and who's not. You know, even the Lord, it mentions Him being a little bit of a divider Himself. It does say that. Because there were times when Jesus preached. The Bible mentioned that there were divisions that came from those that believed Jesus and those that didn't. It wasn't His intent to split them, but it was the devil that was pulling these people away and saying what he's saying is not true. There's one example, and there's a few of them in the Gospels, where it mentions, Therefore, says some of the Pharisees, This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, How can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. There was a division among them. Again, it was a separating of the sheep from the goats, if you will. Other times, it will be a ploy of the devil just to bring destruction, which seems to be the case what we have in our text. The devil, I believe, wanted to take down the kingdom of Israel. I believe that his intent was fully on that desire. And I think it was very clear with what happened between David and Bathsheba. Who was tempting David? Well, it was Satan, no doubt. I don't doubt that Satan was right there. One of his top angels was constantly on the move, constantly watching David. Why? Because David held a very, very significant position, not just as king of a nation, but really the leader of the spiritual light of the world at that time, when you think about it. The nation that was to be the light in the world during the Old Testament days was being led by David. And he held a very, very important position. His decisions made a difference for not just the existence of his people, but also the testimony of the nation to the world at that time. And I don't doubt the devil was constantly on David. And how would you like that all the time? To have some real strong demonic force constantly trying to pick you off. That'd be tough. But David did, all considering, better than I think a lot of people would have, even though he did have his problems. But again, the devil was targeting Israel. And under David, they had gained such prominence that the devil would not have that and was going to attempt to do things to undermine that. This instigator really wasn't looking out for the good of Israel, was he? Just happened to be there, men of Belial, that, oh, here's an opportunity. There's some discord. And things are already a little unstable. And evidently, he was some sort of influential person to be able to pull those people present that day away from David. The devil always has somebody he can use. There's always a Judas. There's always somebody that the devil is planting thoughts in the heart with the intent of one day pushing the right buttons to get that person going. And if he can find somebody that has a position of authority or influence, oh, he's even more delighted. And I've seen that before. I've known of that in other places even. And it's an unfortunate thing. What this guy does is that he gets the representatives of the 10 other tribes of Israel that were there that day to back away from David because of this discord. And this is creating the onset of another political crisis for David. It's like, I just got out with Absalom, now I got this. Yeah. The problems continue. And he's going to have to deal with this. Well, secondly, let's talk about the imprisonment. There's a little verse here, or just one verse that deals with some issues at home when David gets back. It's in verse 3. It says, "And David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to keep the house, and put them in ward, and fed them, but went not in unto them. So they were shut up unto the day of their death, living in widowhood." Now, upon his return to Jerusalem, we see the Bible takes a little bit of time, one verse, to mention some business that David takes care of regarding these 10 women. They were his concubines. They were legally married to David, but they were, I guess, what you might call lesser wives, as they often were in those days. Now, as the verse mentions, they had been left behind when David fled the city during Absalom's rebellion. And their job was to keep the house, evidently, clean it, take care of it, whatever the case might be, while he was away. However, if we remember what happened, Absalom takes these 10 women and defiles them intimately before all Israel with a big tent on top of the house as a means to despise his father. If you go back to 2 Samuel chapter number 16 quickly, we see this. It's because of the counsel of Ahithophel that Absalom does this thing, and of course I believe it was a result of his spite for David. Chapter 16, verse 20, and then said Absalom to Ahithophel, give counsel among you what we shall do. And Ahithophel said unto Absalom, go in unto thy father's concubines, which he hath left to keep the house, and all Israel shall hear that thou art abhorred of thy father. Then shall the hands of all that are with thee be strong. So they spread Absalom a tent upon the top of the house, and Absalom went in unto his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. So we see this event that takes place. It was meant to show his followers that he was dogmatic against his father, and that he was despised of his father, and it was meant to despise David. I mean, it was a real affront. Again, this came from Ahithophel, no doubt in response to David's affair with Bathsheba. Remember, they were related. And, of course, God even predicted that this would happen as a consequence of David's sin, if you go back even further to Nathan's pronounced curse upon David. These women had been, again, David's wives, though they were considered lesser wives as concubines. But we have, I mentioned in the past already how God allowed some of this stuff to take place. Not that it was right, but just due to the lack of understanding that David and some of those people had at that time. They weren't immune from the effects of it, which were negative in many ways. But again, God winked at ignorance at this point and allowed for that. And I won't get into any more of that issue. But what David ends up doing here, evidently, according to the passage, is that he puts the women in ward. We might say that they're kind of put in prison, if you will. The text tells us that he feeds them. Evidently, he takes care of them. But they seem to have lived as widows. They no longer had access to the king. And it's kind of a sad situation. Really, in essence, these women were part of an adulterous affair. And I don't know if they had a choice in the matter or not. The text does not tell us. But, of course, David can't put them to death for multiple reasons. Though the Mosaic law had stated that's what's supposed to happen. But he couldn't do that. So instead he puts them in ward. He keeps them out of sight, because their presence out in the open would have been a public shame to him as well, and given reason for any enemy to despise him and used as an object against him. It could have easily been done that way. So David places them in ward. He takes care of them, but has no relations with them until each of them, I guess, passes on. See, this is kind of complicated, isn't it, on many fronts. Yet, it's something David is forced to deal with because of, past decisions he had made. Again, bad decisions tend to create problems with sometimes no easy solutions. Sometimes we create a problem or make a mistake and, we'll just quick fix it. But sometimes it's not a quick fix, is it? Nor is it an easy fix. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes we say things or some things come out that are real hurtful. And guess what? That sometimes damages relationships that take time to heal. Or we do things and it costs us more money than we anticipated, or costs us more time than we anticipated, or causes us to have to invest effort that was well beyond what would ever needed. I mean, that stuff happens. Bad decisions tend to create problems sometimes with no easy solutions. And sometimes those solutions are even painful to administrate, isn't it? They can be painful to administrate, as was the case here. Another great reminder, though, may God help us make right decisions in life so we can avoid creating some of these complicated, problematic issues in our own life. Well, thirdly and finally, we see what I call the incompetent. The incompetent. Now, needing to deal with the beginning of this uprising and wanting to do it swiftly, as we'll see here in a moment, David calls in Amasa. Now, Amasa, of course, has been now the newly appointed general of the army. He replaced Joab. And David calls him in. His task verse 4, was to assemble the men of Judah within 3 days, and be thou present, or be here present. In other words, he was supposed to have the army ready to go in 3 days. So he goes out and does so. So it begins the collection. But verse 5 tells us something occurred that's going to create a little bit of a problem. So Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but he tarried longer than the set time which he had appointed him. In other words, he wasn't there in 3 days with these men, like he was supposed to be. And this causes great concern for David. It's like, time is of the essence here. And Amasa hasn't done this, so what he does is he tells Abishai, of course, kind of was the second in command, now Sheba, verse 6, the son of Bichri, do us more harm than did Absalom. Take thou thy Lord's servants and pursue after him, lest he get him fenced cities and escape us. And there went out after him Joab's men, and the Sherethites and the Pelethites, and all the mighty men, and they went out of Jerusalem to pursue after Sheba, the son of Bichri. So basically, he tells Abishai, collect everyone who's around here. And you guys got to go, because this Sheba guy, he is going to create more problems than Absalom ever did if he is able to get himself some fenced cities. And we're not able to get a hold on this real quick. You need, time is of the essence. Go, take who you can and chase after him. And who was left who was around the city, he took with him. So he sends Abishai after them, and before Sheba gets a respectable following. Sometime in there, though, Amasa shows up, and it mentions that in verse 8, at the great stone which is in Gibeah. Amasa went before them. In other words, it appears that the armies now have come together, and they're at Gibeon, and Amasa's out there walking in front of the troops, if you will. And what he's got on is the garb, indicating that he's the general that used to be on Joab, okay? But as he's walking in front of this group of men, the army, he's got this girdle on and he's walking, and he's got this sword fastened to his side in this sheath, but as he's walking, the sword falls out. And you can just envision it. As he's walking, all of a sudden his sword falls out, he walks out, makes all that rambling sound, it's almost like, you know, what happened here? And what you see here is that it appears with these few things that Amasa is a little bit incompetent as a leader. These are things that leaders cannot allow to have happen, because they just look a little silly, especially at this time, especially in an army. I remember, you know, when I was in the military, and especially when you were with some of the regular army people, boy, everything's like, especially when you get to senior levels, I mean, everything is like ship shape and sharp, and you know, and that's expected, because of the influence, and the people who are under them need to see competence in their leaders, or else they don't follow them very well. And what Amasa is doing here is he's running late, he's, you know, everything's bobbling around. I mean, he's walking around there, walking up front there like a big shot, and his sword falls out. He looks very incompetent, and that can create a real problem with people who want to follow you. It really, especially in this case of military exercise. And Joab wasn't having it. Already probably pretty perturbed about not having his position. Joab's a little perturbed, and in Joab fashion, he's going to take matters into his own hands again. Verse 9, and Joab said to Amasa, art thou in health, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with the right hand to kiss him. Evidently, he came up to him, hey, buddy, are you okay? What? The sword right under the fifth rib. and slew him right there. Amasa, again, not paying attention, probably didn't think he'd have to. I mean, this is my cousin. Yeah. Sometimes family can be even more brutal, than enemies. And he does them in. He does them in. Verse 10. Smote thereof in the fifth rib and shed out his bowels to the ground. I mean, this was very graphic thing. I mean, he just wanted to smite him once, and he did. And really what you see here is Joab murders Amasa. Very graphic scene. Which, at least the way I'm reading it in the text, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to occur in front of all the troops. Like, whoa. Now that could have been kind of problematic, but Job's been around a long time. And I don't think anybody really wanted to mess with Joab. And I think he had a pretty loyal following to the point where he had retained enough influence to garner the troops around him, because you see in verse 11, and one of Joab's men stood by and said, he that favoreth Joab and he that is for David, let him go after Joab. And it seemed like he still had a pretty strong influence. And of course they had just gotten out of battle against Absalom. So it's not like most of the troops probably were like, all right, we'll just kind of turn a blind eye to it. But with this action, Joab retakes his position back as general. And basically will retain it because it's kind of politically hard for David to dismiss him. And they pursue after Sheba, which again is going to be helpful for him politically because they're going to deal with him. And we'll see that next time. However, it's not going to be without consequence for Joab either. David may not be able to deal with him, but his son Solomon's going to be able to. And Joab's not going to end things well. The Bible does not give Joab a lot of good press. And yeah, he got to his position and he got everything he wanted. But just because you get your position and get everything you wanted, if you do it in backwards ways and dishonoring ways, you still die dishonorable. Again, it's a good reminder to us that whatever we do, may we do it honestly and do it rightly. May we not do things backhandedly or do things in a way that are undermining that which is right, but to have a standard of integrity and excellence that we're following. Joab didn't follow any of that. Joab wrote his own rules. And it's going to come back, he's not listed as one of David's mighty men, even though his actions in battle were certainly mighty, but yet he does not get that designation. He was the general of the army. He doesn't get that designation at all. And he dies dishonorably. It's unfortunate, but that's who Joab was. And it's just, again, a lesson to us. Whatever we do, may we do it with integrity, do it right, and trust God with whatever may or may not come. Amasa may have had some incompetences, but Joab's character was contemptible. And it's a sad thing. Oh, the problems David had to deal with. But that kind of came with the territory. Well, next time we'll continue looking at what ends up happening to this second rebellion and how it's actually going to be put down pretty quickly, which it needed to be before it got out of hand. Let's stand to our feet here tonight. We'll just have a brief word of invitation. The pianist is going to come and play here in just a second. But the problems continue. Maybe tonight you're dealing with a problem. Maybe you've gone from one problem to the next.